you go.
So what you're saying, right, if you're saying that A entails B, right, what you're saying is that there's a relationship between A and B such that if A was true, right, and in fact the entailment relationship holds between these two things, right, then it can't be the case that B is false. B would also have to be true, right? So it's a truth-preserving relation, right? By relation, I just mean any kind of relation, right? So that you guys stand, some of you guys stand to the father-mother relationship to other people, right? So like my mom's name is Naomi, so I stand to, Naomi stands to the mother of relation to me, right? Does that make sense? Right, so that's a kind of relation, and it holds between, say, two people insofar certain conditions meet, right? This is a truth-preserving relation, and this relation holds between these two truth-bearing things, right? Usually we're just dealing with propositions, so let's just say propositions, right? So let's say that these represent propositions, right? This relation and the entailment relation holds between these two propositions, right? Insofar as if A was true, if this proposition was true, and in fact A entails B, then B would also have to be true, right? If B turned out to be false, right? Let's say that A was true and B was false. Would the relation hold between these two?
No.
No, right? So would it hold, right? So remember, entailment is a general concept, right? And we see and we apply to other different concepts, right? So we see it with we applied it to validity, right? So validity is a type of entailment. It's a type of entailment relation, right? So we're saying if you have a bunch of premises, right? So the relationship between these premises and this conclusion, right? So there's entailment between these premises and this conclusion, right? If and only if all of these are true, then it would have to be the case that this is true as well, right? Because if this is false, is there entailment? And what do we call that invalid, right? So we would say it's invalid, right? Where else do we see entailment? We see entailment with if A and B, with the truth conditions of conditional statements, right? And that's what I'm going to get to, the necessary and sufficient conditions. Right. So we also see it with the truth conditions of conditional statements, right? And here we're saying that if the antecedent entails the consequent, then it can't be the case that this is false, right? It can't be the case that the consequent is false if the antecedent is true. So if the antecedent is true, and in fact there is entailment between here, right? Then this has to be true, because if this was false, then there'd be no entailment. And what would we say about this? How would we describe the non-entailment here? No, it is not invalid. So this is a sentence. So what would we say about the sentence? Is it true or false?
False.
False, right? Does everybody see that?
So on the test, would you give us questions about entailment as those, like with sufficient conditions, or?
I could ask you whatever. So you have to understand, right? So I mean, we've gone over this over and over, right? So at this point, I think at this point, if you are really lost, right? All you need to memorize is just the truth conditions for when something doesn't obtain, right? So if I ask you, when would A, so you would have to know that A does not entail B only under this case, right? In which A is true and B is false. This is invalid only under the condition in which all of these are true and this is false, right? This sentence is false only under the condition in which the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, right? But I'm trying to give you guys a deeper understanding of it, right? And that, okay, really what these are, when we're talking about validity and say, and there's all other cases, but we just really are focusing on validity and the truth conditions of a conditional statement, right? And really they're just special cases of entailment, right? So now, with necessary and sufficient conditions, right? When we're dealing with necessary and sufficient conditions, we're always dealing with conditional statements, right? We're always dealing with conditional statements, right? And we say the following, right? So an antecedent is a sufficient condition for a consequence. So we'll say the antecedent A, right? I'm just going to do it shorthand. Antecedent A is sufficient for consequent B if and only if A entails B, right? So if in fact it's the case, right? If in fact A is a sufficient condition for B, right? Then one way of saying that is if A is true, then necessarily it follows that B is true, right? Another way of saying that is it can't be the case that B is false if A is true, right? If there is this entailment, right? So let me see. So give you guys a concrete example. If in LA, then in California, right? There's entailment, right? So being in LA should be sufficient for being in California, right? That's sufficient, it's enough. Why? Because it can't be the case that you're in California, that this is false, right? That you're in California, if it's true that you're in LA. Does that make sense? Being in LA is enough. It's sufficient, right, for being in California, right? So, A is sufficient for B. No. Yeah. So another way of saying it is being in LA entails, right, that you are in California, right? So if somebody says, you have a friend and they showed up out of nowhere and they're in a world, any of California, say, we'll say like Ontario. But hey, I'm in Ontario right now, right? What does that entail of them? But they're in California, right? You wouldn't think that it's anything that they would be anywhere else, right? I mean, I guess you're like Ontario, Canada, or something like that. We're just assuming that that we're just dealing with California. Question?
So it's sufficient to be in California if you're in LA, but it's necessary.
So no, it's not sufficient.
So it's necessary to be in LA if you're in California.
No.
But
So you said so it's
no, necessary to be in California if you're.
So sorry, say it.
It's necessary to be in California if you're in LA.
Yeah. So that okay. So now let's talk. So it's necessary to be. So now we say a consequent B is necessary. So it's a necessary condition of antecedent A if and only if B is entailed by A, right? So B is a necessary condition. It necessarily follows from A, right? If in fact B is entailed by A, right? So being in California, right, is a necessary condition of being in Los Angeles if in fact being in Los Angeles entails being in California, right? So it's necessary. You have to be in California if you're in LA, right? It's a necessary condition.